Hollywood may long have forgotten how to write femme fatales, competent male heroes, complex villains, and love interests. But there is one theme that modern entertainment absolutely excels at. In quantity, at least, if not quality. The tired, lonely, old, bitter asshole. From its most famous incarnation, Luke Skywalker, the once hope of the galaxy, sucking down green tit milk on some backwater planet, to the abject and complete elder humiliation and abuse that was Indiana Geriatric Jones, getting his balls crushed live on stage for 2+ hours. Or hopeless Obi-Wan Kenobi packing mystery meat on Tatooine until baby Leia comes along to give him a reason to live again. What, Luke? Who cares? Did you see what becomes of him? Crazy bitch tried to murder his best friend's son in his sleep because of a bad dream. And now, somehow worse than all the others combined, we have Hal Jordan from Lanterns, an intergalactic super space cop that has stopped some of the greatest and most devastating threats in the DC universe, repeatedly getting killed by a bullet to the head in the very first episode of his supposed brand new show, but only after having been ritualistically pissed on by every woman in the show and being asked to thank them for the privilege. And I wish to reiterate here, to outcompete the previous three in the who can drown most humiliatingly in the septic tank competition is a feat worthy of, if not legend, then certainly infamy. But out of fear of sullying both myself and you with the putrid, rancid fluids inevitably evicted from beating this particular dead horse yet again, we shall instead ask and answer one simple question. Why? Let us begin. First and foremost, before any storytelling reasons, because you can make the tired, lonely old bitter asshole trope work and have it be good, even with established characters, but this requires a very specific setup, and it has actually been done very well in the past, in titles such as Logan, for example, and we will talk about exactly how this is done well a bit later on, but unfortunately, it's not storytelling reasons that made this particular trope be applied to Luke, to Indiana Jones, or Obi-Wan Kenobi, heroes that just do not fit the archetype that works in this role. Real-life concerns were the first problem, both practical from the franchise owner's perspective and far more maliciously so from the writers' and creatives' side. The last 20 or so years saw a massive influx of new, young, and highly political writers. This coincided with a general increase in union power in entertainment, and organizations like the Screen Actors Guild started to mandate increases in hiring practices so that its union members could actually get employment. This extended, of course, to the writing room as well, where the expected standard for a show or a major movie today is to have a minimum of 5 writers and an average of 8. Clearly, the saying about chefs and messes in the kitchen never made it to Hollywood. This resulted in the old writers suddenly finding themselves massively outnumbered and surrounded by very progressive, very activist-oriented fellows, armed with a phone book-sized registry of microaggressions, homophobia, racism, sexism, ableism, ageism, and general issue bigotry. The older writers were either fired for some offense, real or otherwise, and those that remained either learned to keep their mouths shut, only nodding approvingly now and then when asked for an opinion, or embraced the zealotry with the fervor of a drowning man, willing, able, and eager to repent for their sins of the past, by lending their name to the desecration of the future, That's how the same man who gave us Harley Quinn also gave us gender-swap Penguin and pea-suit Harley. This was all utterly uncontroversial, by the way. This was not the result of some mysterious conspiracy on behalf of the younger writers. It made complete sense. It was accepted as an a priori good that the old would be replaced by the new. This further obviously also fell into the immediate self-interest of the new writers who wanted jobs and seniority. And the reason why this was viewed as an a priori good is, you must understand, as we entered the 2000s, we did so from a period of quite literally unprecedented human growth. A golden age of technology, diplomacy, security, gaming, and entertainment as a whole. We simply assumed that it would go on forever, like all citizens of any great age do. A natural part of that progression was to hand the reins over to a new generation. We expected them to do better still than their predecessors. And they too, having been told all their lives that the future was theirs, as soon as the dusty old men could be swept away, believed it. With no opposition, no seniority to rein them in, and a single, unified liberal ideology, the new guys ran wild. Hirings were soon made on a near solely ideological and identitarian basis. All agreed that the matter of utmost importance was to oust the old and bring in the new. This coincided perfectly with the studio's desires as well. There were a lot of franchises that were getting very long in the tooth, and many studios had suffered from an extended drought in the generation of new franchises. Specifically again because they were looking a little bit too far into the future, rejecting what already was. This can be seen perfectly with Disney, who in particular actually generated several new and very promising films that would later be hailed as absolute masterpieces: Treasure Planet and Atlantis: The Lost Empire. But they came in at precisely the wrong time. Everyone was rushing ahead to the future, which they believed was 3D animation, not the old 2D. Therefore, the absolute masterpieces that were Atlantis and Treasure Planet were thrown aside, despite the fact that they were every bit, if not indeed significantly more so, revolutionary than, say, for example, Toy Story. But one represented the new, and the other the perceived old. This near-religious preference for the new lies at the very core of our tired old man problem. Star Wars, of course, was back then viewed by Disney to be a cash cow of unprecedented dimensions, but Harrison Ford and Mark Hamill were in their 70s and 60s. Hardly firm foundations upon which to build a franchise, tired old men in need of replacing. So, when the young came around and promised a new future to the studios, pitching their ideas of passing the mantle, it sounded like a fantastic idea. The writers got to replace the old, and the corporations got new heroes to milk for another 20 or so years. It was, however, easier said than done. The writers combined the worst of two worlds. On the one hand, they viewed the old with derision at best and outright plain hatred at worst for having had the temerity to stand in their way for as long as it had. And on the other hand, they were equally convinced that their new heroes would be infinitely better, creating the by now familiar formula. The old is to be humiliated, dragged through the dirt, weakened, made feeble, and be both verbally and physically denigrated non-stop until finally, at long last, being allowed the honor, the mercy to sacrifice itself for the new. It is a humiliation and sacrificial ritual all in one, designed very explicitly so to end the old with no hope of it ever returning. The end must be complete and final, either through the character's in-world death, his irrelevance, or lack of agency, and in the minds of the audience, by reducing them to pathetic ancillary characters, outshone in every way by the author's brand new and, in their opinions, better characters. And by better, of course, they mean by their metrics. More diverse, more politically appropriate for the age. Luke and Indy are both replaced by women, unsuccessfully so, and Hal Jordan in Lanterns exists solely to be hauled through the mud to make Jon Stewart look better so that he may be given the ring. But rather than embrace these new heroes, the audience were in fact outraged. And this happened again and again and again with perfect clockwork precision. Instead of welcoming in the new, as they had always done before, it was held responsible for the destruction of the old. As, of course, it was. Directly so, intentionally so. The audience instinctively understood that this was not a handing off of the mantle. This was not a voluntary surrender of responsibility. It was rubbing dirt all over the old icons to make their own look shinier. It was petty, malicious, and evil. And it did not end either. Because this was not some miscalculation on the studio's behalf, a mistake in how to pass the mantle. The writers really do hate the icons of the past, and the more the audience cling to them, the more they refuse to embrace the new, the stronger the hatred grows. As the new writers are fueled by frustration, believing with every atom of their being that they can and are doing better than the old. And no amount of evidence to the contrary will convince them otherwise, because this is a question of their very own self-worth. And the ego will always do everything in its power to protect itself. Again, this is not some conspiracy, it is simple human nature combined with the circumstances that created this perfect storm to begin with. Nor is this a quality problem either. If it was, then the idea of replacing the old with the new would not in and of itself be flawed. You would just need to find the correct way in which to do it, but this is not the case. Even if the rest of the Disney canon trilogy was an absolute masterpiece, the Luke portions of it would nevertheless leave a sour taste in the mouth because the tired old man trope, whilst it can work, can only really work with a specific type of hero. The most useful and clean distinction we can make between a hero where this trope works and where it does not is the Byronic hero. This is a character that is usually defined by an inner struggle, by mystery, by a brooding nature brought about by trauma, and often driven by some force beyond or besides himself, yet also capable of deep, sincere emotion. Wolverine from the X-Men is a perfect example of this type of hero. He is defined by loss and trauma, from the loss of his parents to a century of war and conflict and the eventual predations of Weapon X. He is all brooding melancholy, viewing himself in a dark light as a weapon, a tool of extreme necessity, even as he understands that it brings him dangerously close to the villains he fights. This makes him wary of others, of friends and comrades, and so his stay on any one team is usually temporary at best, as he chooses to self-isolate. Yet deep down, unlike his brother, Sabretooth, Wolverine is a good man. This all came to the fore perfectly so in Logan, a movie that does every bit of the tired, old, washed-up hero trope. It even has a ready-to-go replacement in the form of X-23, Laura, and yet this movie is very fondly remembered. And it all comes down to the hero in question. Wolverine has always been self-destructive, always been pushing away those close to him and throwing himself into danger, fueled as much by self-loathing as by heroism. The tired old man is the natural end point of Wolverine. And so Logan feels like a fond yet inevitable farewell. And it is, from start to finish, focused entirely on Wolverine. This is his journey, his story, and his end. Even his quote replacement does not feel like a replacement at all. Laura is very much so a side character. She is there to reignite the spark in Wolverine, not to diminish or destroy him, but to build him back up to a worthy farewell. It also helps that Logan was set in a doomed world. There was nothing to replace because the world was at an end. So Laura never felt like she was the one reducing Logan in order to replace him. She was simply a part of this ending. This all comes in sharp contrast to Luke, whose entire identity in the original movie is that of the optimistic hero, who even when things are at their very darkest, still chooses to embrace hope and struggle onwards. The broken old man of Disney canon simply cannot be reconciled with who he was. Made even worse, of course, by the fact that his replacement is openly, stridently there, specifically to push him out of the way and take his spot, as she officially does in the third movie. Leaving aside all pretense and simply taking up the name of Skywalker, as if that was a title to be claimed rather than a character. We see this as well in Indiana Jones, who rises back up again after countless setbacks with a smile on his face. His most defining characteristic is the sense of romantic adventure, a world with incredible mysteries to discover and bad guys to defeat. He is vital, active, and always working upon the world as you experience it through his adventures. He is not the retired, grumpy old defeated man he becomes in the Dial of Destiny, who at the very end has his agency denied to him by a stronger, more capable woman. To put a point to it, when you take a Byronic figure and age him into deeper bitterness and isolation, you are following the grain of the character. The audience can feel the continuity. It's sensible and it is logical. The pain of their ending is tragic, but coherent. It evokes sadness, but acceptance, instead of the rage inspired by Luke and Indy. When you take an optimistic or resilient idealist and force the same Byronic template onto them, it feels like the story is arguing against the character. This is why it always feels like a betrayal rather than development. When Luke casually throws away his lightsaber, that is his character being asked to carry thematic weight, far beyond what he's designed to do. The weight of failure, obsolescence, the end of mythic certainty. All of which conflict with the hope and agency that made him a beloved character in the first place. And this is not to say that you couldn't do this. You could impose the tired, sad, lonely, bitter old man archetype onto an already established, more romantic character, theoretically, but it would require enormous time and build-up. It would need serious, life-altering trauma to be experienced and communicated effectively to the audience. It can be done, but it takes years, decades even. Batman is an example of this, as he started out as more of a romantic character in, say, the Silver Age, plagued by trauma to be sure, but still optimistic, a force for genuine, unreserved good, fighting for his parents' memory and their dream of a better Gotham. Only very slowly, and over many iterations, did he become the brooding hero of today, fully formed into it during the legendary The Dark Knight Returns comics, where Bruce is again every bit the broken old man trope. But the character's will and mythic necessities are reasserted rather than dismantled. The Dark Knight Returns does not invent the darkness or the isolation, as it did with Luke. It intensifies what was already a core ingredient to the character, and asks what that obsession looks like when taken to the logical extremes. when the body starts to fail and the culture has moved on without him. Crucially as well, Carrie Kelly is never a replacement to Batman. She is a part of his story, an element within his Baronic arc that reignites the fire. As this too is how you must ultimately pass the mantle. For the mantle to be handed over to a new character and have the audience not immediately rebel, particularly in this day and age where people are more wary of this than ever, you require the same careful, extended build-up that you would need to turn a beloved character into the tired, bitter old man to begin with. The replacement cannot simply appear and be as capable as the main hero. They require suffering, they require failure, they require building up, until they naturally become competent and capable, recognized by the main character, not as a 2-minute soundbite of him placing a hand on their shoulders and going, "Oh, you're ready now," but rather a long-term, an evidence-based demonstration of their newfound capabilities. But this remains an impossibility. Patience has never been a virtue of the younger generations, not throughout all of history. This is not a weakness by any stretch of the imagination unique to ours. What is unique, however, is that our generation of new, young people in these industries have been told since the very first time they thought of entering into these industries that they were the future, that they were the ones to determine what would come next. And this cannot change, because for it to change, this new generation would have to face the fact that they are not the equal of their predecessors. They would have to go against the grain of everything they knew, understood, and have been told. Furthermore, it would go directly against their vested interests. Imagine, for example, if you were Anna Neguira, and you've done nothing up until this point. You have no real achievements, and your destiny seems to be a middling actor with a forgetful career and nothing in writing whatsoever. Then somebody comes and offers you to write Supergirl out of nowhere. Of course, you're going to accept. There is no situation in which this person then says, "I'm not qualified for that." And that is the exact same story that has repeated across the writing rooms in entertainment. Thousands of people who all believe themselves to be God's given gift to entertainment because they have been told they are so, being given opportunities far beyond their abilities, and then growing defensive, naturally so, when their gifts do not match up to the task. It is never their fault. It is always somebody else's. The audience, the directors, the producers, time itself, or those evil people on the opposite side of politics. Whereas the simple explanation is, sometimes people, especially in this day and age, for reasons of politics and preference, are placed in positions that they simply do not belong in. And the consequences of those decisions can have tragic consequences. Up until the very last moment, however, the self-assuredness never wavers. The future will come true just so long as the last few bitter old men can be moved out of the way.